Yesterday in Israel, the oldest citizen in the state of Israel, and perhaps the oldest person in the world, died at the. He was born in Yemen in 1903. He immigrated to Israel in 1949 with 4 children. He had 2 additional children in Israel. He fought in the IDF, in the Israel Defense Forces, and he passed away, leaving behind his grandchildren's grandchildren. He merited to see 6 generations. And his grandchild said, his granddaughter said, that up until the age of 116, he was still going to shul every day. And she believes that the isolation because of the pandemic, being at home and not being able to go to the synagogue for the past 6 months, caused him harm and ultimately led to his premature demise at the age of 117. He could have lived even longer, maybe even living to the age of Moshe Rabbeinu, which was 120, the maximum lifespan as delineated in the Torah, in this week's Torah portion, that man can live till 120 years. God said the lifespan of man should be 120 years in this week's Torah portion. But while we talk about the lifespan, this week's Parsha also has the first commandment in the entire Torah as we begin the Torah anew from Bereshis. And the very first commandment is Peru Urevu, be fruitful and multiply, and conquer the earth. And it's sad that today in America the birth rate is about 1.7 children per child, per mother, per couple. And in Europe the birth rate is about 1.5, which means that we're not even replacing ourselves. For every 2 parents that leave the world, there aren't 2 children that are entering the world. However, we can be very proud that Israel leads the way, and the average birth rate per woman and couple in Israel is 3.1 children, and that's not even talking about the religious families, that's just talking about the general population. So we see that we are, as Jews, a light unto the nations in fulfillment of this week's Torah portion of Pru, be fruitful and multiply. But here we have a very important lesson about what does it mean when we say Pru Revu, be fruitful and multiply. So when we look at the 6 days of creation, we find something very interesting. That every day God teaches us how to be a creator. And we find that there are 3 steps in the process of creation. Every day of creation, God says, Vayomer Elokim, and God said, Yehi, it shall be, or light, for example, on the first day. Or on the second day, there should be a firmament to separate between the waters above and the waters below. Or on the third day, there should be vegetation. Or the fourth day, there should be the sun and the moon and the stars. Every day God created, the 5th day, the 6th day. So the first step in creation is to have a vision, to have a goal, to have a plan. Like God set out every day to say, Yehi Chain, it should be such and such, ... That's step 1, a vision, a goal, a plan. What's step 2 in creation? Vayehi Kain. God actually implemented his vision and his goal. It's not enough to have a plan and a vision. You now have to go about creating what you intended to create. And God every day, after he says, let it be, he actually makes it be. Now you may think that at that point, creation ends. You had a plan and you created it. But every day we find that there's still a 3rd very vital step to creation. And perhaps this is the most fundamental step. After every day, God reviews what he made, and God observes it, and Vayomer Elokim, Vayar Elokim, God sees ki tov, that it is good. After we create something, we have to sustain it. And we have to sustain it by seeing the good in it, and actualizing its positive potential, by drawing out all of its goodness, by recognizing and appreciating the good in it. And when we talk about children, this is so fundamental. It's one thing for parents to say, let's have a child, and then go about creating a child. But now the lifelong task of the parents is every day to say, Ki Tov, my child is good. To love the child and see the good in the child, and hold up a mirror to the child for the child to see their own goodness. Because if you want the child to grow and develop and flourish, you have to bring out all of their potential and goodness by showing them their inner potential and goodness. And that's perhaps all part of the commandment of be fruitful and multiply. The Torah is not just saying to have children. Of course we have to have children, and we have to bring children into the world. And as I said, we're very proud that Israel leads the world with the Western world with 3 children, more than 3 children per average household. But the real task of Pru, being fruitful and multiplying, is multiplying the goodness and potential of our children. And we do that not by criticizing our children, not by rebuking them, not by pulling them down. Yes, we need to do that sometimes as parents. But the primary role of a parent is Vayar Elokim, to see that it is good, to recognize, appreciate, and point out to your children their inner goodness so they can maximize all of their potential. I want to share with you a story that once happened to me. Often I go to visit prisons, sadly, Jewish inmates, and it's very sad to see young people who ended up in prison, and you wonder what went wrong. And one time after we were celebrating Purim in the prison, not too far from here in Belgrade, a young man came over to me in his 20s, and he said, "Thank you for visiting us, coming on this holiday to visit us and bring the joy of Purim. I really appreciate it." And then this young man who was at that time in my age, in his 20s, and he was serving a long sentence, he said to me, "You're the only ones who come to visit us, the rabbis from the Jewish community. It's the only visitors I get." And I looked at him and I said, "I'm so sorry to hear that you don't get other visitors. I'm glad I'm here, but tell me, what about your father? Doesn't your father come to visit you?" And he said, "Well, I actually never met my father. My mother got pregnant when she was a teenager, and by the time I was born, my father left, and I never really met my father." And then I said, "Well, what about your mother? Does your mother come visit you?" And he looked at me and he said, "My mother visited me in the beginning, but she has her own problems. She's an alcoholic, and she doesn't visit me anymore either. I may get a letter from her once in a while, but I really haven't seen her in years." And at that point, I realized why this man was in prison. Not only because he committed a crime, but because he grew up without a father and with a mother who had a drinking problem. She was an alcoholic. And I thought, how blessed by the grace of God go I, that I grew up in a loving home. But if a child grows up with parents who don't love the child and show the child who they are and what they're capable of achieving, then it's no wonder that they end up in a life of dysfunction and crime and end up in prison. This young man wasn't given the opportunity, perhaps, to, although he had free choice, but he wasn't given the opportunity to really realize his potential. And so let us take to heart this week's commandment of Peru Revu, be fruitful and multiply, and realize that when we bring a life into this world, like Mr. Shlomo Sulayman, who died yesterday in Israel at the age of 117, his life has brought into this world literally over 100 descendants, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. And that's why every soul is considered like an entire world, but not only to bring physical children into this world, but to nurture our children with the love and appreciation and actualizing their full potential by drawing out their inner goodness, by saying to them each and every day, Ki Tov, you are good, I see your goodness, and give them the ability to rise to their full potential. Have a wonderful day.